Hello and welcome to another video aiming to get you the very top grades. Once more we're going to learn the FOSS way, my method for forcing the examiner to give you at least a grade 7 when you're writing about poetry. Tissue is the hardest poem to understand. I've actually made 3 different interpretations of it because it's so tough. But that playlist is 2 years old. And I've now taken a lot of that complexity out just to give you what you need for grades 7, 8 and 9. So let's start with the opening as we always do. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Now the semantic field here is deliberately religious. So the idea of light shining is Christian imagery. And it's also Muslim imagery. It's the idea of God's light shining through goodness. And she's got an extended metaphor going on through this poem where the tissue paper is also our own tissue of human skin. And the story of this poem is about acceptance. It's trying to convince the reader that we are all equal and the same beneath the skin colour, beneath our religion and beneath our different cultures. So it's a hugely topical poem. Most English teachers think it's too ambiguous to come up, but now that I look at it again, because it's so topical, I think this might well be an examined poem, and it would certainly get you quite high marks if you had to choose a non-19th century poem to compare. Right, there's a really subtle use of Christian language here. This isn't how you spell the altar in a church, but it is a homophone for that. And so she's trying to give readers who are probably from a Christian background a Muslim perspective to help them realise the similarities between the Muslim religion and the Christian religion, between Islam and the Catholic and Protestant faiths. And she sets out her point of view here, her aim, which is to alter things. And what she wants to alter are the perspectives of her readers and the different cultures that she lives in. Now, you may be lucky enough to have a family Bible or a family Quran. And, they're often hundreds of years old. And what you'll find is they have this tissue paper at the back of the Quran or the Bible, and also covering illustrations. And so the tissue paper acts as a kind of transparent protection, just like the plastic coatings that you put on top of a phone these days. Now, what's interesting here is that she's not giving us the Quran in order to signify the holy teaching inside it. That's not what makes us similar. What makes us similar are the names and histories, the families, the relationships, and these are written down at the back of the Quran through the generations as they're passed down from father to son or mother to daughter and then to granddaughter and grandson and so on. Now in this way she's focusing on the generations, and so moving from the interpretation of tissue being the paper to tissue being our skin, our birthright, if you like, which gives us our names and our histories. There is a quite odd description here where she doesn't say a person has written in the names and the histories. She focuses on the person's hand. Perhaps that is because whatever culture we come from, we all have a hand. It's something we can all identify with. But this is also a hand removed from a body, so it might signify that in our current political and cultural climate, we are divorced from our names and histories. We're not really in touch with them. And one purpose that Imtiaz Darka might have is to put us back in touch with what our names mean and what our histories mean. The poem focuses on lots of things that interrupt or obscure our view of what's important. And one of the things she focuses on is the idea of a map. Now, a map is the perfect symbol of different countries, different cultures, often competing against each other and often enemies. But her next description which is a metaphor. The sun shines through their borderlines, suggests that there is a light which can show these divisions between countries, these borders are an illusion, and we are actually either side of the borderline exactly the same in the light. Now, we can obviously see that the sun is part of religious symbolism. It signifies a god. You only have to see where it's positioned in the heavens to show that it symbolizes God visually, and also historically it's always been used to symbolize God's power, whether it be a Christian God or an Islamic one. So when she refers to maps as tissue too, she's showing that they are fragile, they're just an illusion, they are a construct that we've invented, a set of differences that we've imagined exist, but in reality those divisions, those differences are simply illusions. And if we look at it properly with the right light shining through it, we'll see that there is only equality of people on both sides. Next, she imagines a kind of all-seeing architect, another metaphor for God if you like, or for Allah, who is going to find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue. So here she's using the language of building that an architect would do, the grand design, but instead of making buildings or cities or countries, instead this architect is going to design something with living tissue, in other words, with people. Now, this doesn't imply that these people will all be of the same culture. The image implies that lots of different cultures, lots of different people will be drawn together. That's what the word grand design suggests here, that it's much bigger than something local. It's obviously not an easy task, which is why she imagines the architect finally finding a way. The use of the word trace here is also revealing. You trace a line on paper. You'll probably have done this in art, where you're given a picture, you hold it up against the window, and you place tracing paper on top of it so that you can copy the lines for your own design. But you also trace your heritage, your family line. And that's quite interesting, because if you trace our histories backwards, we end up with the same ancestors. So, Abraham, for example, is a prophet in the Christian faith, in the Islamic faith, and in the Jewish faith. And so by tracing a grand design with living tissue, in other words, going back through history and looking at our ancestors, we end up with common ancestors. We end up saying, actually, just a few thousand years ago, we were the same people. And this is historically true. Now she imagines a structure that has been built out of paper that's deliberately not permanent. It's thinned and transparent. Permanence encourages us to put down roots and say, this is our culture and that's your culture and we're different to you because. But in this metaphor, the paper is thinned, so the difference between what's on one side of the paper and the other is less. In other words, the borders between my culture and your culture are very easy to break through. Our differences are much more apparent. And that's why she also uses this idea of transparency. It's much easier for me to understand the culture next door if it is very much like my own. And if I look at skin as tissue that is transparent, I'm much more easily able to identify with the person on the other side of that transparency as being much like me. And even if they're not, I don't see their differences as a border, as a threat, because those differences are transparent. They're no longer threatening. I understand the person on the other side, the person from a different culture and a different religion or a different country. Then the final part of this extended metaphor imagines that this thin tissue is now turned into your skin. So here the poet is saying, I want you to have the same tissue as me. Now, she's not saying this literally. She doesn't want everybody to have the same skin colour as herself. What she's saying is, if that tissue has become thinned and transparent, then the colour is irrelevant. Your skin is the same because it is transparent. But when we get to the end of the poem, we can see where the power relationships lie. Here, the dominant culture appears to be the Western one, or the British one, in which Muslims are a minority, and therefore the implied audience is non-Muslim and probably white. And so finally here she is asking for acceptance from the dominant culture of the minority culture and minority religion, and saying, look, underneath the skin we are just the same. Think about this deeply and accept it. Okay, we've dealt with the opening. We've looked at the language features, in particular the extended metaphor. Another language feature was the homophone of alter and the semantic field of religious language. I haven't focused on the language techniques here. Let's do it now. So we have the deliberate alliteration of transparent and turned. So this emphasizes the final turn, the volta, if you like, where she gives her final idea of confronting us and demanding our acceptance. We can look at the assonance of the letter I in living and tissue and thinned and skin and into, and ask why she emphasizes the letter I. Well, we could say that this gives us the idea of her identity, which she now wants to become the reader's identity. She wants the tissue to be so transparent that the identities are shared. Okay, we've dealt with the ending, so now we need those grade 7 features of writing about the form and the structure. Okay, well, the form is free verse. There's no particular syllable pattern to any of the lines, and there isn't any pattern of stresses. And so it acts, if you like natural speech, as though she's talking directly to us in order to get us to change our minds. Now, the structure is reasonably formal in the sense that each stanza is 4 lines long, as you can see, until we get to the final stanza, where we have what I called the volta, the sudden turn. So we've got 4 lines, and then the big reveal, if you like, the volta at the end, where she gives her final viewpoint, which is that the request, or if you like, a demand for us to change. And that gives us a reason for her having this line on its own rather than just in a 5-line stanza. So I hope you're as pleased with that analysis as I am. I'm really chuffed to get that down to under 15 minutes and strip away a lot of the ambiguity and complexity and show you an easy way to interpret this poem. It will obviously compare to any other poem that has ideas about culture. So the emigre or kamikaze or even London. In terms of method, this reliance on the extended metaphor and the imagery of light makes it a really easy comparison to emigre, which uses exactly the same idea, where the city is always described in metaphor and the idea of light, sunlight, suffuses the poem in the same way. And remember, that's why I've only given you 5 quotations, because it conforms to the Fosse, which makes it really easy to compare to another poem and get full marks. Let me know in your comments if you find this style of video useful, and as usual, don't forget to subscribe if you want more. See you soon on my channel.